A little bit about me. I grew up in Colorado Springs. I went to a school called the Classical Academy, and I graduated from UNC in 2010. So that was 2 years after the recession hit. So now I'm a designer, a freelance illustrator in Nashville, and I'm an author and speaker, and I give workshops, and I kind of do a lot of things. I just wanted to go through like what I do, why I do it, how I do it, just some general advice for students. For what I do, just to preface, the market will tell you two different things. It either tells you to like niche down and be a specialist and be an expert, or it tells you to be a jack of all trades and be good at lots of different things and be flexible. And I actually believe both are true. I think that you should be an expert in something, but you should also have these other skills that help you support that expertise. And so that's kind of what I tried to do with my whole career. So the thing that I'm an expert at is sketchnoting or visual note taking. And the things that I do to support that are graphic design, illustration, some web work, animation, video. And those are just skills that I've picked up from college and then also just on my own along the way. At UNC, I was a senior in 2009, 2010, and like I said, that was like a year after the recession hit, and there were 0 creative jobs. And so I was working at the marketing office at UNC as a student intern. That was super fun. I learned a whole lot. And then I was also working at the enrollment management office as a student assistant. And so I was basically working 30 hours a week doing graphic design for the university and then doing a full class load on top of that. And so it was a lot of work, and you just kind of... Yeah, go for it.
I just remember, I think I mentioned this, that during spring break, when all the students left to go to the beach, party or whatever, Emily sat down and worked hard on her resume and her portfolio so she could try to get jobs. And you got a job.
Yeah, so over spring break, that's pretty much what happened. I had been trying to apply for jobs in Denver and Loveland and Boulder and Fort Collins, and there was like nothing, because the creative jobs that did exist were being filled by people that had been laid off and had 20 years of experience. And so it's like, there's no way I'm getting a job in Colorado. So I just had to broaden my horizons and look outside of that. And Texas always has a really great economy. And so I looked in Texas and got a job at Texas A&M, and I worked there for a couple of years. And it was just really gratifying to be able to walk across the stage at UNC, like shake Kay Norton's hand and get my diploma and know that I had a job waiting for me when so many people didn't. It was just like, oh, this hard work paid off, and that was really rewarding. So if you're a junior or senior, like put in the work to find a job so that when you graduate, you don't have to move in with your parents and work at a fast food restaurant just to make ends meet. Like, work really hard to get that design job right out of college if you can. So I worked for Texas A&M for about 2 years, and just 2 takeaways that I took away from that job was, one is bureaucracy is everywhere and you can't escape it. So especially with things like healthcare, education, things that have government funding sometimes, there's things called tenure, where if someone is around for a really long time, they're really hard to get rid of. And that's sometimes a good thing, and sometimes it's a really bad thing, because you've got staff who have been there for 20 years and they're just a bad egg and no one likes working with them and they're just really negative, but no one can get rid of them. So working at a university taught me, like, you just have to work with the people that are there and you don't have any control over it. So learning to communicate tactfully and being polite to older people and respectful, and just learning how to communicate how other people need you to communicate is like the number one thing I took away from that job. And then also that everyone's a stalker. I learned from that job that people were watching me on my social media, they were watching me on my blog, and even if they weren't like officially following my accounts, they were following me. And so you just have to be super careful about what you're saying online, even if you don't think you're being if you think you're being tactful, like, just don't even go there. Like, don't rant, don't say anything negative online, just keep it to yourself, because people are watching and you never know who it is. So Texas A&M was a good job, but it wasn't really where I wanted to be, and it was a toxic work environment because some of those tenured people stuck around, and I didn't really want to deal with that for a long time. So At the time, my church was hiring, and so I worked there for 3 years. And my first project with the church was a rebrand, and that was really intimidating as like a 23, 24-year-old to rebrand a 2,000 person church and just know that that many people are going to be seeing your work and judging it and telling you if it's good or not. But luckily, I was the only designer, but we had other people on the media staff, like a videographer and a writer and a sound guy, and so I had input outside of myself, which was really helpful. And I think we all as a team nailed the redesign, so that was a good confidence builder for sure. And so a couple things I learned from the job at the church was like, if you see something, say something. It kind of applies in the work world to me too. Like, there were times where I was just bored at work and I didn't have any work. Like, design is very ebb and flow. Sometimes you're really, really busy, and sometimes you're bored out of your mind because there's no projects coming in. And so if there's ever just a receding of projects, like, walk around and look and see what you can find. And I actually got to consult the church on like, hey, we should try online giving instead of passing the bucket around because that's kind of antiquated. And hey, we should have a mobile friendly site. And hey, our landscaping looks really awful and not very welcoming. How about we fix that? Like, these things are not in my job description, but I still got to kind of raise the red flag and say, this is a bad design decision, even though it's not in my job description. The other part that I learned from that job was people are happy to have you where you're useful to them, and it might not be useful for you. Like, you have to have goals and kind of an overall vision of where you want your career to go, because no one else is going to just come alongside you and say, you have so much potential and you're wonderful and I'm going to help you get to the top. Like, that just doesn't happen. In reality, you have to know where you want to go and then find someone who will say that and help you along the way. But no one's just going to initiate that. So with the church job, they're like, yes, we love you. We love your work and we want you to stay here forever. And I'm like, okay, there's no path of growth. I'm in this really tiny, small town. There's no creative community. I feel kind of stuck. And so that's when I made the decision to move to Nashville, where I worked at a startup. A friend of mine had got me a job. Moving to Nashville was sort of this, I don't know, teeter-totter moment of like, I can stay in Texas and do safe work for the rest of my life, or I can go try something new in Nashville and try and push my boundaries and see what kind of work I can do. And so at the startup that I worked at, it was so small when I started. I think I was hire number 9 in the company, and then by the time I had left, there were like 200 employees within a year and a half. And so that kind of growth in that amount of time is really hard on a business and all of the people, and so that was really difficult. The company had started pulling back on all the promises that I'd made when I was hired, like, oh yeah, we'll give you flex time, and you can take your lunch whenever you want, or skip lunch, or here's our wonderful culture, and like all that stuff that was there when I was hired just was completely gone. And so I actually had them fire me so that I could get severance pay, so that I could be a freelancer with a nice little pad of cash. So it looks bad on paper, but it's like, I don't care. I'm not going to be working for you guys again. So go ahead and fire me and give me the extra $2,000 severance, and we'll be great.
You didn't do anything bad, did you?
No, we had a new manager who was trying to force me out of the company, because that's what happens in startups. They hire a manager and then they fire everybody and bring in their own team. And so that was kind of the situation that was playing out. Like, all my coworkers got laid off the next 2 months, so it was fine. I was like, bullet dodged. The things I learned from that is, like, one, you have to stick to your guns. Like, the company was trying to force me out and like go back on the promises that they had made, and I just stuck to my guns and said, hey, like, here are the things that you wrote out and promised to me when you gave me the job. If you change your policies, I'm happy to do that. But they wouldn't actually change the policies. It was just like this unwritten rule, like, oh, you have to stay later because it looks bad if you're leaving at 4 p.m. It's like, yeah, but I'm the one turning the lights on in the morning. So just sticking to your guns and saying, like, this is what we agreed on and this is what I have in writing, and if they're going to abuse it, then that's when you leave, because they're not going to respect you as an employee. And the other thing that I learned was that startups are not for the faint of heart. So startup culture is really exciting. You get to work on a lot of really cool projects. Like, I did packaging, and our company was one of the first companies to ever advertise with Pinterest, and I just did all kinds of ads. And if you can think of a design program or project for a company, I probably did it, which is cool and it helped my portfolio. But at the same time, that was a crap ton of work, and they work you to the bone at startups because they're trying their hardest to turn over the profit and make money and grow. And so if you're not really ready for that kind of workload, then don't work for a startup. I'm really not the best designer, I'm really not the best illustrator, but I'm really good at business and I'm really good at communication. And that's the number one thing that people tell me when we finish a project is like, wow, thanks so much, we love the product, but you're really great to work with because you answer our emails and phone calls. And I was like, that's the easiest part. But so many designers don't have that communication and business piece down that they're really hurting themselves. Answer emails, like I feel like these are really basic, but people don't do it. So I'm going to say it, like answer emails, have phone calls. And I am a millennial. I hate phone calls. I don't ever want to talk on the phone to anybody ever. But the people that are hiring me are Gen X, baby boomers. They're older than me and they grew up on the phone. And so that's like, they're comfortable on it. And so I just had to get out of my comfort zone and decide, okay, yeah, I'm going to do phone calls now, even though I hate them and I feel like an idiot every time I'm on the phone. Started doing video calls. Most of my clients are actually in Nashville, and so I'll have discovery calls. We'll just set up a Zoom or a Skype call. And that way people feel like they're hiring a person instead of this random person on the internet who has an email address that may or may not get back to you whenever you want them to. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And it's just being extremely clear about your whole process. So, hey, thanks for contacting me. The next step is the proposal. And after the proposal, there's a contract. And then we work on the project. And then I send you invoices. Like, if you just tell people what to expect, they're so much happier. A little bit of both. It kind of depends on who's contacting me. So when I do get direct emails, if it's like for a big name person, I email back right away because I know that I'm usually not the only one that they're contacting. It's like, okay, we sent out emails to all these people we know. We're going to see which one comes back. I always like to reply quickly because I know I'm competing for that spot. But if it's just a random person that I don't know, or a friend of a friend, or a referral, I might take some time, like maybe a day, to look through their website and kind of get a feel for who they are and what they might be needing to see if I even want to work with them at all. I have a contact form on my website that has conditional logic, which means when they answer a question, a pop-up will say like, oh, because you said this, I'm going to ask you this question now. So if they say, I want to hire you, then it's like, well, what do you want to hire me for? And it's like design. Okay, what kind of design project do you want to hire me for? And so it forces people to actually have their crap together before I ever talk to them, because if someone just emails me to my direct email address, hey Emily, I saw your work, it's really great, can I work with you? It's like, okay, now I have to spend so much time researching you and asking you all these questions when you could just do that on your own. And so the contact form really eliminates a lot of time on my end when these people should have all this information already. And that's also a red flag catcher. So if people bypass my form and they put NA for all of the little form fields, like what's your event date, NA, or what kind of audience do you anticipate serving, NA, it's like, okay, I know that these people, they're either in a hurry and they need something, or they don't know. And in both cases, I don't really want to work with people like that because they don't have their crap together. They don't know what their goals are. And if they're going to be skipping steps in the contact form, they're going to be skipping steps elsewhere, like paying you. I also ask about, like, are you working with a deadline on the contact form? Because if their deadline is in 2 days, it's like, I don't have time for that. Like, I schedule everything in advance, and I do take on some short-term projects. Like, hey, I have this really fast turnaround thing. Can you help? Like, it's really great to help people in their time of need because then they'll come back to you again. But at the same time, if you don't keep those boundaries respected, then they're going to break that boundary over and over and over again. And they're always going to say like, oh, well, Emily always does my last minute projects. And then before you know it, all you're doing is last minute projects. I think the thing that has grown my client base the most is just word of mouth. Like, I go to conferences, I go to networking events. I'm an introvert and I don't like either of those things, but that's where the people are. And if you can communicate well, and if you're professional and you follow up and you show that you really want to do a good job, like, people talk about that. As soon as I finish a project, I send a client a survey. It's really honest, and it's really hard to read that survey sometimes. Like, what could I have improved? What did I win at? What did I fail at? But if I don't ask those questions of the client, I'm never going to know areas to improve, and it makes them respect me more because it shows that I want to do a better job next time. Ever evolving. I think I've tried just about every website platform there is. Like, I think there's so many good tools now that it doesn't really matter where you put your website. I really like WordPress just because there's so many plugins that you can use, and I use a drag and drop editor called Divi, which is like the #1 theme in the world, I think. And so my website changes at least once a month in some way. When I first started out, it was just my student portfolio from UNC, and then slowly and surely I added projects from Texas A&M and my church and Smile Direct Club, and then I was like, well, I was getting a lot of the same work that was in my portfolio because you attract what you project. So if all of your projects on your portfolio are branding, that's probably the kind of work you're going to be getting because that's what people see. So if you don't want to do branding, don't put that work on your website. And so I started taking down a lot of the design projects that I had done that I didn't want to do more of. I focused on illustration more than design. So when I have actually done pretty much everything that you could possibly think of as far as career. Like, on my website when I first started out, it was like graphic design, and then it was like only illustration. And for a while in Texas, I did adventure race photography. So I would go to like Tough Mudder events and take photos of all the race participants. And then I was like, I'm a designer and a photographer. And it's like, actually, I'm not. Just kidding. Forget the photography thing. And I didn't want to do more Tough Mudder events, and I didn't want to do more adventure photography, so I took that off. And yeah, your website should always be evolving, and it should always reflect the work that you want to do. So normally when you write a book, you have an agent, and you and the agent work together to come up with a proposal, and you basically write half of the book, and then you present it to all these publishers, and you hope that one of them picks it up and buys it and pays you to write the rest of it. And that's not what happened with me. So I've just been posting visual notes, sketch notes online for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years consistently, and the publisher contacted me on my website, but they said, we found you on Instagram. And I think the way that publishing works now is publishers, like, books just aren't being sold in the volumes that they used to be, and so publishers are trying to be innovative in how they put books out. So instead of finding the best books from the proposals that are presented to them, instead they just go out and find the expert that they want to write the book that they know is going to sell well, which is really interesting. So what they did was they went on social media and found sketchnote, visual note-taking artists and picked the best ones, and then sent them an email and said, do you want to write a book? And I think I was the only one that they were like really interested in for that particular book, and I said yes. And I'd actually been writing online course material and curriculum for a year before that, and so I had basically written the book halfway. And so when the publisher said like, hey, yeah, let's write this book, I was like, great, I already have half of it done. So The Art of Visual Note-Taking, it's an interactive guide to visual communication and sketchnoting. So I just walk people through all the basics, from learning how to listen to just really basic drawing, and like how to lay out the page and how to space out the notes and how to write neat. Just like, there's so many different elements that go into making a successful visual note or sketch note that if you don't teach all the little sections, overall it's not going to look great. So the whole purpose of the book is to walk people through the very beginning so that at the very end they can have a good looking sketch note. Yeah, I never get the information beforehand. I just know how long the speaker is supposed to talk. And so, like, if I go to a TED event, TED Talks are usually about 30-35 minutes. And so I know, okay, that's how much I space my page out. And the only information I get ahead of time is the headshot and the title of the talk. And everything else is just live on the fly. The reason I'm freelance instead of at a company is just working for companies, I've never really had a good experience with bosses or culture or policies, and it's just like these things don't align with my personal values. So I really value having close relationship with my family and traveling and visiting them. And if I'm working in Nashville and I only have 2 weeks of vacation, that means I'm not going to be able to see my family and visit them very often, which is a huge bummer. So, but if I'm freelance, I can go fly to Colorado whenever I want to and just work remotely, or just take the weekend or a couple days off because I run my own business. So mostly I really appreciate the flexibility that I have by being a freelancer, and just doing the math on it too. Like sometimes you see when you're applying to jobs that the job posting will say like 40 or 50K a month or for a year, and you're like, wow, that's like a really sexy entry level job. That's more money than I've ever made in my whole lifetime. And then you get your first 4-figure paycheck and you're like, this is amazing. But then if you do the math on it, it's like, okay, how much could I charge if I was doing freelance? And what are my costs? Like cost of living, are you commuting and paying a crap ton in gas money? Like you just have to do the math on your goals in your life and what you want to do. And sometimes having a job is really helpful and it helps you get to those goals. And sometimes being freelancer is going to be a lot better for you. Maybe you can even make more money being freelance or work less. So it just kind of depends on your situation. But for me, it's like the whole reason why I really like freelance is I love business, I love serving people, and I love being flexible. I think the number one thing for me is workplace. So where I'm actually doing the work. I've done 2 or 3 different co-working spaces here now in Nashville, and I haven't really found one that's been worth the extra cost. So co-working spaces run about $400 to $600 a month here, and that's for like a shared table, not your own private office. And so it's like, am I doing work in an environment that warrants that extra cost when I could be working at home for free? So ultimately, I just decided to work from home because it's way cheaper and I'm not as distracted as when I'm at a co-working space. And the downside of that is that I really don't leave the house all that much. Like I have no reason to go out and just run into people. And my husband and I don't go out to eat very often, so I'm not going out to lunch all the time and running into people or going to coffee. Like I have to make time to do those things because it's not natural. So when you're a freelancer, you don't run into people, you don't have work relationships, it's just all you. And so that can be really good because it means really focused work, but it can also be really bad. Like a lot of extroverts really struggle being freelance because they thrive on that people energy. So the number one thing for me is work location, and sometimes I do get lonely and I don't get outside enough. But I think other challenges that I face are, one, legal. So I had an LLC for about 3 years, and that was really good for at the time. But then I hired a business manager, and he was like, hey, if you switch to an Inc., I can save you $7,000 in taxes because of some of the laws that Trump has passed. It's way more favorable to be an incorporated business rather than an LLC. And so like that's just information I would never know unless I had hired the business manager to tell me. But I had to get to a certain income level before I could afford the business manager. And so when you're starting out, it's really hard because you do have to wear a lot of hats. You have to learn about laws and taxes and just like all those little nitty gritty details, like how do I file my quarterly taxes and where am I supposed to do that? And it's just a lot to juggle. But then once you can find your footing, you can afford to hire the experts to tell you what to do. And so that's been really helpful. But like I still feel like I'm just now breaking into that where I can hire people to do stuff for me because then I don't have to do it. Google is your friend. And I do a lot of local design meetups. So there's one in Nashville called Ladies Wine Design, and it's a monthly women's only design meetup, and you just talk about focused issues, whether it's like, how do I balance my work life? Or I'm really depressed. How do I talk about mental health with other freelancers? Like there's lots of different topics that they talk about. And then they also have a Slack channel so that you can ask questions outside of the regular meetings. There's an organization called Ladies Get Paid, and that's just empowering women to look up like tax laws and helping them figure out how to negotiate for pay raises if they have a day job, and because women are stereotypically really bad at asking for raises and getting fair compensation. And then outside of women's stuff, there's just normal design networking things like AIGA, Creative Mornings. In Nashville, there's a couple chapters of like art and legal groups. Like a lot of lawyers have paired up with artists to have events and talk about laws, and so that's been really helpful, but not every city has that. But at the end of the day, I think it's just all relationships. So one of the biggest things that I advocate for is going to small design conferences and just meeting everyone that you can. Like the large ones like How and like Under Consideration and Adobe Max, like those are great, but you just don't get that homey small town vibe because there's so many people. But if you go to a smaller design conference, you can meet these people, and a lot of them have answers because they have the same questions. So just follow up with people or ask Twitter. That's what I do. I don't know. For me, it's different. I have advice for normal people, but I wasn't normal. Like, I was working all the time, and most college seniors are like, yeah, I'm going to take like 12 credit hours instead of 18, and I'm going to go to the beach for spring break because I earned it, and like all this stuff. And I was like, I have to work 80 hours a week to get my dream job. So I don't know what advice I would give myself other than to relax. But I think I would say you have to go where the employers are. Like when I was searching for jobs in Colorado and Texas, and then even here when I thought I wanted another day job, I was always trying to put out my stuff where my generation was hanging out, like Instagram and social media, but the people who are hiring people like me aren't on those platforms. So like if you want to get hired, you have to go to the platforms where those people are. So LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, yeah, they might be for old people, but that's the old people are the ones who are hiring. So go on those platforms because that's where they're hanging out. And if you make your presence known, then I think it's a lot easier to make those relationships. It's not necessarily always like the project itself, like, or even the cool clients. Like so many designers say, I want to work for Nike one day, but once you're a designer for a while, like Nike doesn't treat designers very well. Like they don't pay very well, they don't treat you very well, your rights get sold away, and so it looks cool to say, I worked for Nike, but then everyone who's worked for Nike is like, welcome to the club, we all got our face kicked in by Nike. So I don't know, the projects I enjoy the most are usually just the people that want me, not just some designer. They're like, I like your design, I like your style. And so like there was one guy who runs an insurance company south of town, and he's just this nice little normal guy, and he's like, I just love your illustration and I think it would be a really good fit for this project. And he had like this whole proposal typed up, and it was just so cool that he wanted my expertise and my illustration in his project. And so it's the people that seek you and want you as an individual rather than just who's going to do it for the cheapest, any takers, that sort of thing. So I think I did some contract work a couple years ago for Dave Ramsey's company. He does financial advice, and I got to work on some neat projects with them. They have an app called Every Dollar, which is like a budgeting app, and so I did like all the stuff in the app store and the preview illustrations, and I did some animated email stuff for them too. So it's just neat one-off projects like that. Yeah, that's a great question. So I started out doing hourly because I didn't know like how long a project would take, and so like especially if you've never done it. So if someone says, I want you to make a 10-page color booklet for this workshop that I'm giving. And you're like, okay, well, I've done like a 2 or 3 page booklet. I could probably do a 10-page one. I'm just not sure how much longer it takes. And so hourly is really good in the beginning to help you figure out the length of time it takes to complete a project. But then I feel like once you have your timelines figured out, that's when you should stop doing hourly and do per project. Most of my projects that I bill are per project because I have those time estimates down pat by now. And even if I go a little bit under or over, I don't like bill that extra on the client unless they've kind of broken the proposal and like added extra editing rounds that we didn't approve. So Like my policy with clients is there's no invoice surprises. I'm going to tell them if we have to charge extra, and if they're asking for something extra, I say, okay, yeah, I'm happy to do that. It'll be X amount of dollars extra because that's outside of the scope of work that we agreed on. When a project comes in, I will say, you have a 50% deposit that's not refundable, because that way if they bail or they can't get their stuff together in time, I'm not left in the dust waiting for some money when I've already started working on it. So the 50% deposit is just like my security, and they don't ever get that back, even if they drop off the face of the earth. And so then we'll finalize the project, go back and forth, and then once everything's final, I send them the final invoice for the rest of the 50%. And they don't have any files from this point. Like everything's just flat, or it has proof across of it, and that's just so they can't take the proofs and then run and then not pay the last 50%. And so that way, like, so many designers moan online. They're like, oh, my client ghosted me, they never paid me, and now I'm left in the dust with nothing. And it's like, well, did you give them the final files? And they're like, well, yeah. I'm like, well, there's your problem. Like, if you bill that last 50% before you give them the final project files, then that eliminates that problem altogether. I have QuickBooks, and you can design your own invoice on there, stick your logo and address, and it looks very official. And if you have specific services that you bill for, you can just type it in and it automatically charges for it. So if you have like a set rate for logos, you just type in logo and it just automatically populates it. You can set terms for 15 days or 30 days or due upon receipt. QuickBooks can also email them if they're late or behind, and it's just a great tool. It's pretty cheap too. I'm just bad at projecting my life plan. So if you had talked to 22-year-old UNC grad Emily and said, what's your life goal? Like, I would have told you, I'll just stay in Colorado. I'll probably work at an ad agency, and I'll live in Fort Collins or something like that and have a great life, and that's that. But then when I got to college, I was like, oh, I can work out of state. And just like my horizons got broadened. And then once I lived out of state, I was like, oh, I could do this and I could do this. So I feel like with every year, my horizons get broader, and it's not that I pick something out in the future. It's just like I know that there's a lot more possibilities than what I could possibly think of. And so instead of making like long-term life plans, I just say, these are the goals I have. Like, I want to make X amount of dollars, or I want to be able to visit my family this many times per year. And then whatever happens to come my way that allows those goals to happen, great. So like, I wasn't planning on the book thing happening. It just sort of fell in my lap. And so it's like, yeah, this is a great thing that will help me reach some goals to teach people. It'll help me earn extra income so that I can retire early if I want to, or the book helps me have some credibility so I can speak and go out of state if I want to. So just kind of taking what falls into my lap and then stewarding that in the direction that helps me the most. So I don't have like long-term plans like, I want to be a designer at Nike or something like that. It's just, I have those life goals, and whatever helps make those happen is what I try and do.